Hey, and hey. It is the first of many, I hope. Pick 6 2022 NFL Mock Draft live shows. It's me, Ryan Wilson. No Will Brinson, so that's an added bonus right there. I'm joined by Josh Edwards, Chris Trapasso. We're going to do a little draft chit-chat talking about mock drafts because while it may be October 26th, we are all, I think, 8 versions into the 2022 versions of our mock drafts. So we thought, why not get together and talk about it? Because for some reason, people get really fired up talking about mock drafts no matter the year, the time of the year, whether it's mid-April or like early September. Crazy town indeed. Josh, Chris, how you guys doing?
Doing good.
Pretty well. I mean, the draft has taken on a life of its own. So to be recording in October isn't even that big of a deal anymore because there is going to be an interest out there.
That's the thing.
I mean, there's so many teams right now. I feel like that their fans, like the Lions, the Texans, probably the Jets, maybe even the Dolphins, need to be like thinking about the draft already. So I don't think it's too early at all.
Yeah, Chris, you didn't mention my Steelers. They should be thinking about the draft as well. And by the way, I want to be the first to report that Mike Tomlin is in fact going to USC. It looks like he is going to take that job. That's a joke. If you haven't seen Mike Tomlin's comments today on Tuesday to reporters when he was asked about that question, it is probably one of the funniest things you've seen in the Steelers season thus far because there haven't been a lot of bright spots. But I don't think he's going to college. And honestly, and Josh, you cover Kentucky really closely, the football program there. And before we get going, here's the thing. When you talk to coaches around the league that are some are younger and maybe have their hands thinking about going into college, the thing that always comes up, they don't want to go recruit 16 and 17-year-old kids and have to deal with it. It's hard enough dealing with 22 to 25-year-olds. I can't imagine, like I said, Josh, you're closer to this than I am, having to go into living rooms and sell yourself to teenagers who you have no idea what they're going to do because they're teenagers.
Yeah, just imagine a job where the fate of your career lies in the hands of a teenager's decision in December as you're trying to plan your kids' Christmas presents. That's what it's like to be a college coach. In addition to that, there's all this additional hand-holding, whether it's making sure guys are going to class, making sure they're getting the appropriate grades, making sure they're showing up for treatment, nutrition, all this kind of stuff. So when you're in the college level, you have to be very involved. There's a lot of hand-holding. In the NFL, I mean, these guys are supposed to be professionals. They're supposed to know what they have to do on a daily basis, and you don't have to micromanage them. So there's definitely a lot less on your plate as an NFL head coach. But I will say, I think Mike Tomlin should consider it. In fact, I think he should outright take the job, and he should also see if Lamar Jackson and or Joe Burrow have any remaining eligibility.
Josh Edwards, Browns fan, speaking from the heart. It is telling that you're worried about Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, who are not doing great right now. By the way, we'll be live on YouTube every Tuesday at 1 p.m. going forward, breaking down our weekly mock drafts and the comings and goings from the previous college weekends about how it affects players in terms of them rising or falling down these mock draft boards we're making as we go along. And don't forget, turn on the alerts on YouTube, hit the bell notification so you get alerted every time one of these videos goes live. Make sure you like this video. Smash that like button, as Debo likes to say. You can ask us questions in the chat. Tell us who you want to talk about in terms of your teams, your draft needs, players you like in college, if you're college-oriented, concerns you have about your NFL team and where those teams might target players in the upcoming draft. And, all right, let's get to this. Let's get started here.
Well,
so
before we start, I think it's important to note to the viewers that we are doing the Marshawn Lynch challenge. So for every like, Ryan is going to take a shot on live television, and we are going to challenge the FCC rules as we go through this podcast. So just
wait a second, Josh. I don't know the Marshawn challenge. What did Marshawn say?
Oh, you didn't see that last night on the Manning cast?
No, I don't. I'll be honest. I don't watch the Manning cast, not because I don't like Eli and Peyton. I think they do really well, but I watch the main telecast just so I can keep up what's going on with the game because we do the pod afterwards. But I do like what I saw of it early on in the season. What happened last night with Marshawn?
So Marshawn joins the broadcast. They tell the story about how he would take some shots of Hennessy before games. So they asked him if he did any shots before he came on the air last night. He said he took 3, one for each of Peyton and Eli, and then one for himself. And then he went on to challenge and contest all FCC regulations by dropping every curse word that we have in the dictionary.
I love it.
Marshawn.
All right, let's get to this. I'm looking over all of our mock drafts, most recent mock drafts. Mine comes out on Monday. Which one of you guys comes out on Tuesday?
Mine's Wednesday.
All right. So, Josh, when does yours come out?
Thursday.
Okay, so Monday is Wilson, Wednesday is Trapasso, Thursday is Josh. So look forward to that. So mine is the only most recent one for the week. But as we go through this thing, and I'm looking at our most recent mock drafts together on cbsports.com/NFL/draft. You can check it out there if you want to. I have Kayvon Thibodeaux going, as does Josh Edwards. Chris, as he has want to do, is mixing things up with a curveball. He has Evan Neal going number 1 overall. Any concerns whatsoever, Chris, I'll start with you, about Kayvon Thibodeaux in terms of being obviously the best edge rusher and one of the front runners to be the first overall pick?
In terms of him as a player, not really. I mean, he doesn't have a super refined arsenal of pass rushing moves. Like, he's not Chase Young or the Bosa's. Those are, to me, like, in terms of being polished and being a top tier prospect, like, those are the gold standards. But I think he's pretty close. Like, he's not quite as big, but he's pretty close to Myles Garrett in terms of just being freakishly athletic for his size. And really the only reason why I had Evan Neal at number 1 is just thinking that the Jaguars are going to probably try to protect Trevor Lawrence. Hopefully. I mean, who knows what Urban Meyer is thinking there in his head. But yeah, I think at this point, especially after the weekend that Kayvon Thibodeaux had, he's really trending toward being the number 1 overall pick, because if you can just teach him a few pass rushing moves, we're talking about a double-digit sack guy who's also really good against the run.
Yeah, so Thibodeaux started off pretty hot. Then he got injured, hurt his ankle, and then he came back with a vengeance against UCLA over the weekend. Josh, there's not a lot. Like a few years ago, Kayvon Thibodeaux was one of the first edge rushers off the board, and there were concerns about Kayvon because he was smaller. He sort of came on late at LSU. He hasn't exactly hit a home run at Jacksonville yet, and that's fair enough. But I think Kayvon Thibodeaux, I mean, I just don't have very many concerns about him as a player.
No, I don't either. He's a little thinner in the lower body. I mean, maybe that would be an issue if he wasn't showing that he could hold up under pressure, but he's certainly done that so far. I think the one important thing to note with all of this is that we're not projecting trades at this point. So if Jacksonville is in this number 1 spot, edge rusher is not a forefront on the forefront of their minds. Like, Kayvon Thibodeaux is not as important as maybe an Evan Neal or a different position, but I do think Kayvon Thibodeaux is the best prospect in this class and the odds-on favorite to be number 1, because there's not that elite quarterback in this class. Second of all, I look at the 3 kind of blue chip defensive players, at least in my eyes so far, with Derek Stingley, Kyle Hamilton, the safety from Notre Dame, and then you've got Thibodeaux. When you're talking about positional value, linebacker, safety, those don't carry the same type of value as a cornerback or an edge rusher. And then you look at Stingley. He's had some injury concerns over the past couple of years. That leads me to believe that Kayvon Thibodeaux is probably the likely favorite to be the first overall pick. Lots of time for it to still play out. But for me, that's kind of my thought process into how Thibodeaux ends up being that top choice.
And that's right. It's worth noting that the order of this isn't anything other than reverse Super Bowl odds as determined by CBS Sportsline. So you can go yell at RJ White if you're unhappy about that. But that's where we're working from now. We'll do the draft order probably somewhere around mid-year just to mix things up. But that's all this is. So we're not making any predictions about where your favorite team will finish. But I think it is fair to say the Jaguars, the Texans, the Lions will all be in the mix for that number 1 overall pick. And again, Kayvon is the safe pick. Like you mentioned, Josh, this quarterback class is, as I like to say on the podcast, straight up doo-doo. It's not great compared to recent years. It feels more like 2013 than 2021. And 2013 was when Trapasso's Bills took E.J. Manuel in the middle of the first round, and then Geno Smith went 39th overall. And those are the first 2 quarterbacks off the board. I think this class is probably better than that, but I'm not willing to say a lot better because I haven't seen it. But before we get into the quarterbacks, I want to mention another guy in the top 5 that I had going number 2 to the Texans this week. And I'll be honest, I watched him over the summer in 2019. I watched him over the summer in 2020, and I didn't get it because people were talking about then, but he has really come on strong this year, and I actually really love the way he's playing. Michigan edge rusher Aiden Hutchinson. Where are you at on him, Traps?
Yeah, I think we always, like, since the 2011 draft, like, there's every couple of years, there's always this push for, like, a white defensive lineman edge rusher to be the next J.J. Watt. And obviously everyone's kind of fallen short of that since Watt entered the league 10 years ago. Hutchinson is probably the closest thing.
TJ Watt would like a word, but go ahead.
True. I mean, you're right on your Steelers. I knew you were going to throw that in there. I mean, in terms of being like 6'5", 6'6", almost 300 pounds, can play up and down the line of scrimmage. I mean, obviously TJ Watt is an elite edge rusher. I think Hutchinson kind of looks like JJ Watt. If you go back and watch Wisconsin film, I think Aiden Hutchinson, what Watt did at Wisconsin and what Hutchinson's doing in the Big Ten at Michigan, very similar. There's a lot of power to their games. And what's weird is, like you mentioned over the summer, when I watched him over the summer too, I didn't see someone that was like a crazy athlete. And I know a lot of the PFF guys were like, yeah, he's got good pass rushing moves, good power, but he's really stiff. And then he was like, was he first on Bruce Feldman's freak list? Like, he was on that freaks list really high. So I think people were like, hey, this guy's actually a pretty good athlete. And he looks a lot more dynamic and a lot more explosive around the corner this season. So I think mocking him number 2 overall is not crazy, because I think what Thibodeaux may lack in the pass rush move arsenal department, Hutchinson definitely has that. And like Josh said, Hutchinson is not thin in his lower half like Thibodeaux is. So I think we'll see him rise up boards potentially to number 2 overall in April.
Josh, let me ask you this. I'll have you sort of put these two guys together, both Hutchinson. And by the way, it's worth mentioning, Michigan has done a pretty good job recently putting out these edge rushers. Rashawn Gary's coming on, crazy athletic, took a while to get going. Chase Winovich flashed at times for the Patriots. Quiddy Pay, first-round pick of the Colts, who made some plays over the weekend. So Hutchinson or Derek Stingley Jr., who you mentioned earlier, I think Derek Stingley Jr. has a broader body of work in terms of playing at a high level and certainly doing it in the SEC. Where are you at on those guys, and is there any way you would take Hutchinson over Stingley in the top 5?
No, I would still take Stingley over Hutchinson. In fact, I probably like George Karlaftis from Purdue a little bit more than I like Aiden Hutchinson, to be honest. I think he's just been a little more consistent. I think you see a little more of the grown man strength with Karlaftis. So I still prefer him a little bit more. I've moved Hutchinson up my board a little bit. I had him on the fringe of first round coming into the year, but I think with his play, he's certainly kind of elevated himself into probable first round selection. But I'm still not quite at the same level as a lot of people have gotten to at this point. So between the two, I would still take Derek Stingley, even with his season being cut short by injury. Just a really talented player. Again, one of those premier positions where he should be able to step in right away and contribute. So I still prefer Derek Stingley. I will say also, even with Stingley out, LSU has this young kid named Eli Rix, who is going to be eligible next year, and he's in the same conversation. Like, he's fantastic. So a guy to know for the 2023 draft.
Hey, Josh, let me ask you this. Do you think there's any to mention? You mentioned Rick's number 1, and I think it just reinforces, and like I mentioned earlier, you covered Kentucky pretty closely. If you're playing the SEC, you're a dude, and there's a very good chance you're going to get drafted. And that's just the reality of it, because that's such a that conference is so incredibly talented, top to bottom. You just see guys out there making play after play. Is there any reason for Stingley to come back? Should he pull a Nick Bosa? Should he pull a Jamar Chase and say, thanks, I'll see you in April?
No, there's no reason for him to come back whatsoever. I think he's in his mind been a little checked out even since his freshman year. I think everybody kind of viewed him as one of those players that is just trying to pass the time until he's eligible for the draft. So first chance he gets, I'm fairly certain that he's gone.
All right, Traps, let's move on down the board here at the top. We'll get to picks 5 and 6. I have the Giants taking DeMarvin Leal, the sort of do-everything guy out of Texas A&M. I keep going back to this. I've watched a couple of his games this year closely, but the one that I come back to is the Alabama game from last year, where he at times was taking over against Evan Neal. Evan Neal was playing guard at that point. I love Evan Neal, but he got your attention. An incredibly acrobatic interception in that game, and the only reason he didn't score touchdowns because Najee Harris had to run him down from behind. Obviously, Texas A&M beat Alabama this year. I haven't watched that game closely yet to get a look at Leal, but between him and Kyle Hamilton, who plays safety, and I describe Kyle Hamilton like this, and it's sort of hyperbole, but that's kind of the point. He's 6'4", 215 version of Ed Reed in terms of just being a ball hawk in the middle of the field. You don't want to throw the ball at him. Suffered a knee injury against USC. It looks like he's going to be okay, according to Brian Kelly. That was a scary looking knee injury. He was helped off the field, but thank goodness he's going to be okay. Of those guys, if you're a team that needs both edge rusher and safety, defensive back help. Well, where are you going?
Man, that's tough. I'm flipping a coin because I feel like those two right now are somewhere in this range of like the number 4 to number 6 overall prospects in this class. And it's difficult with this because it's a true dilemma. They're both so versatile. So like if you want a defensive lineman that can really cause problems at any position up front, that's DeMarvin Leal. If you need back end help, you need a slot defender, a safety, someone that can match up with tight ends, that's Kyle Hamilton. So I really think that there's not a wrong answer if you just need a versatile, high-level talent on your defense. DeMarvin Leal, I thought against Alabama the other week, he was pretty darn good against, another good front there for the Crimson Tide. Kyle Hamilton, I think teams will probably lean in that direction because there's a bigger need for, those premier coverage defenders, those Derwin James types. And I think what Kyle Hamilton can do, he can literally play multiple positions for you and be an all-pro right away. And he's going to have probably a bigger impact on the game early on than DeMarvin Leal will. Although I do think that Leal can be that guy that's playing all 3 downs and getting you 6 to 10 to maybe even 12 sacks on the inside, playing outside. They're both blue chip prospects that are, I feel like, destined to go in the top 10.
Yeah, I should be clear, by the way. It's Leal. I always call him Leo, but it's DeMarvin Leal.
Me too.
So
gotcha.
my bad, DeMarvin. I got the DeMarvin part right. Messed up on the Leal. I put it on the list of things that I mess up regularly. Josh, I'll ask you quickly. Any concerns about Kyle Hamilton? Because I know sometimes we draft these cornerbacks and defensive backs, and they struggle. Jeffrey Okudah is a great example. 3rd overall a couple years ago. He struggled with injuries. I loved him coming out of Ohio State. Of course, he went to Detroit, so that has something to do with it. Any concerns whatsoever with Kyle Hamilton?
Not so much. I think ideally it just comes down to scheme fit. I think he could play, that cover 2 type safety, but at the end of the day, he's best served playing downhill, making plays in front of him. A guy that's not going to be asked to just play single high, like that's not using his skill set to the best advantage. So similar to kind of like what Traps was saying with both of these guys, their versatility, DeMarvin Leal, a guy that could potentially line up on the edge. He's probably going to have to play inside most of the time, but the ability to be able to do both of those is incredibly intriguing in today's NFL because you're looking at some of these Brandon Staley types who knows how to use these types of skill sets. They're gonna run those tackle end stunts and really create problems with interior linemen. I mean, it's those kind of players are more coveted in today's NFL, and I think Kyle Hamilton and Leal both bring some of that to the table. So ideally, you hope they just end up in a right situation because we saw Isaiah Simmons. That took him a long time to be comfortable in that system, and he's still not what everybody expected him to be. So it's all about where you are taken, what's expected of you initially, and just your overall fit on that particular team. But otherwise, I love Kyle Hamilton. I mean, his instincts are off the charts. Really physical player, capable of making plays downfield. So I love him all around.
Yeah, it's hard not to. And I loved Isaiah Simmons as well. But to your point, some people in the NFL didn't love him as much as I did, and those people turned out to be, not surprisingly, more right than me. All right, let's get to it. Let's get to the quarterbacks. This isn't last year where it was clear who was going first overall. This isn't 2 years ago when Joe Burrow came out of nowhere. And I think we're at the point in the process where people are sort of grasping at straws and trying to make quarterbacks into something that they're not. I love Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, as I sit here, should not be drafted in the first round. And that's just, and you guys may disagree with me, and that's fine, but that's how I feel. And I know I don't want to steal his thunder, but Pete Prisco is really high on Kenny Pickett. And we've talked about it offline, but I have a lot of concerns about Kenny Pickett. Not a lot, but enough to where I wouldn't take him in the round 1. I would take him in round 2 all day long. I mean, you look at the round 2 guys last year, Kyle Trask, the early round 3 guys, Kellen Mond and Davis Mills. I would take him mid to late first round, second round, and go from there. But let's start with Matt Corral, who is listed at 6'2". I'll be interested to see how tall he is. Last week against Tennessee, he ran the ball 30 times because Lane Kiffin just don't care. Again, over the summer, I watched Matt Corral and said, he does a lot of things well athletically, and that's the way the NFL is going with these quarterbacks. I didn't feel comfortable taking him in the first round over the summer, but I think now I get it, and you're doing a ton of projection. That's something else we have to remember. It's not just a snapshot in time of where these players are. You have to be able to try to think, what is this guy going to look like going forward? And I think the most important thing, without question, is scheme fit. And Josh just sort of talked about that with Kyle Hamilton, but quarterbacks, absolutely, because you put my guy McCorkle Jones on the Bears, and he's probably already he had his funeral already because he would be dead. So I just think that's incredibly important. So let's start with Matt Corral. I have him as my first quarterback off the board. My QB1, if everyone is completely healthy, is Carson Strong. But I think there are real concerns. I've talked to some folks in the league that are concerned about that knee, one that he suffered in high school, the knee injury. And I think he had to clean up on it just prior to the start of the season. He still looked great, but I think at the end of the day, if you're worried about injuries, then that's going to be a real issue for you. So Matt Corral's my QB1 asterisk. Traps, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, what he's done to kind of separate himself, and you're absolutely right. This class does feel a lot like 2013, where people were trying to make Ryan Nassib and Matt Barkley. And I certainly remember that being in Buffalo, that it was like, is it going to be Geno Smith or Ryan Nassib or Matt Barkley? And then like Barkley goes later, Nassib goes later, and they're never really materialized into starters. No one from that class. But what I think Corral brings more than any of the other quarterbacks, even Malik Willis, who's the most athletic, Corral gives you that really intriguing blend of athleticism and pocket passing ability. And specifically what I like about Matt Corral is that he's almost over aggressive. And I rather have my quarterback be willing to take those shots, as long as he's not turning the ball over a ton, and Corral really hasn't, than someone that is checking it down, looking for the outlet, the swing pass, or a scheme that is overly using screens. I mean, certainly there are a fair amount of them in Lane Kiffin's offense, but they also do like to push the football down the field. So if you're really looking for like someone that can come in, feels like he has the mentality to make those difficult throws in difficult environments, and has upside because of his athleticism, I think he's got a pretty strong arm too. I think that's Matt Corral, and it makes sense at this point in time, like you mentioned, for him to be the first quarterback off the board inside the top 10.
So, Josh, let me ask you, because Matt Corral, as I mentioned, is my QB1 asterisk, but a lot of people like him. We also have some questions in the chat about this, about Malik Willis from Liberty. I went to the Syracuse Liberty game a few weeks ago and watched Malik, and he showed some things, and then he showed some other things. I have yet to have him go in my first round. I don't think that's going to change. I've talked to teams that don't think he's a first-round pick, and I sort of share those sentiments. Where are you at on sort of this athletic quarterback, including Matt Corral, in that conversation?
I don't think Malik Willis should go in the first round right now, and I agree with you. I don't think Kenny Pickett should go in the first round right now, even though I was, one of the foremost Kenny Pickett fans before this year. It's just his lack of overall athleticism, I think. In today's NFL, like you kind of have to have that if you're going to be one of those elite quarterbacks.
Exception Mac Jones. Go ahead.
With the exception of Mac Jones, of course, who, of course, was the number one quarterback last year. How did we all screw that up? Malik Willis, you want to see that consistency. You want to see him showing some growth. And that's what we've seen from Matt Corral to this point. I was, looking at the comments down below. DM Mart was saying that he's a little worried about that Lane Kiffin scheme translating to the NFL. I think when you're looking at some of the traits that Corral brings to the table, yes, you do have that RPO incorporation, but I think where you've seen the growth with Corral this year, he's throwing with accuracy, he's throwing with anticipation, he's making better decisions. Last year, he had 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. This year, 15 touchdowns, just one interception on the year. So you see that growth borne out in his statistics. But then to take it a step farther, okay, is this a guy that's going to be able to hit the slants? Is he just dinking and dunking to get all of his yardage? No. Like when I'm watching his tape, he's able to throw with accuracy, with touch down the field and make some of those downfield attempts. So it may be a little bit more of a transition to a pro style kind of offense. But if he's going to land in one of those outside zone Kyle Shanahan type schemes, this is a guy that could step in day one and succeed if put into a good situation.
So someone put this on Twitter. I can't remember who, and I apologize. But if Mac Jones was coming out this year, just to keep this going, he would be the clear-cut number one quarterback. Anyone disagree with that?
I wasn't even a big Mac Jones fan, and I agree with that.
Josh, you're throwing your hands up. You're tired of talking about Mac Jones already, but I'm assuming you agree.
I gotta let you take your victory laps. We
take
so much. We take so much heat. Like we deserve the victory laps at the same time. So I do wholeheartedly agree with you that Mac would probably be the top quarterback in this draft class. He's probably been the most consistent. But like you noted, if he had ended up with Chicago or Jacksonville, like this situation, this whole scenario could be completely different. If Trevor Lawrence had ended up with Bill Belichick, I think the narrative would be totally different. So situation, scheme, supporting cast, all of that stuff plays into a rookie's early success. I think that has to be factored in every given year as we're projecting some of these guys.
So Peter Clone, excuse me, I mispronounced your last name, ask in the chat, do you think the Steelers will pick a quarterback, or is it smarter to go lineman, defensive back? I think it's actually smarter to go offensive lineman, defensive back. I have no idea. Just me speculating as a Steelers fan. I hope they decide to get Aaron Rodgers and Russ Wilson and then decide what to do in the offseason. Because if you need a quarterback in the draft, you're going to be in a bad way. And I'm assuming there'll be teams, because every day they do it, that sort of overdraft these guys and then have to deal with the consequences. But that said, I had the Steelers, because I don't do a free agency mock draft. I have the Steelers taking Carson Strong this time around at 17th. So Traps, give me your 30-second answer. And Josh, you can just follow up. Where you're at on Carson Strong? How concerned are you about the knee? I love the way he plays. I know he's playing in the Mountain West, but he's playing against competition, and he seems to be dominating week in and week out.
Yeah, I really like Carson Strong. I think he's one of the safer quarterbacks in this entire draft class, and it won't be surprising to me if he lands like in the middle there of the first round where you have him. What I like about Carson Strong so much is how much experience he has. I think in instant gratification society that we're in today, and that we've had, Kyler Murray going number 1 overall with 1 year of starting experience, Joe Burrow with 1.5 years starting experience, he gets in to that number 1 spot. I like the fact that Carson Strong has been in a lot of tough road games, has seen every type of blitz and every type of coverage that you're probably going to see in college, and just has more attempts, a lot more than any of these other quarterbacks. So I think his film is good. He throws it down the field in the bucket with a lot of accuracy. And I think, if it's not for that knee, he would be like the clear cut number 1 in this draft class.
Yeah, I like Carson Strong a lot too. Obviously, it's easy to get excited about his arm strength. What Traps was talking about with his experience, I think you see a lot of that at the line of scrimmage with his ability to, change into what he considers a more successful call, the way he orchestrates the play before the snap, the way he lines up his teammates. I mean, all of this maturation that you see before the snap, I think, is what gets you excited about Carson Strong, in addition to the arm that, everybody has talked about to this point. That Nevada team is actually really good. They've got a lot of good players on that team with tight end Cole Turner. You've got Aaron Frost, the right tackle. You've got Romeo Dubes, who I know was a big fan favorite on this podcast early on. So there's a lot of talent on that Nevada team, and Carson Strong is obviously at the forefront.
Yeah, One thing I want to say about this, just about this quarterback class, I think in April we will see how the NFL views the quarterback spot. In that, do you take Carson Strong, that is a much higher floor than any of these other quarterbacks, but might never be like an all-pro? Or do you roll the dice on someone like Malik Willis, or maybe to a lesser degree, Matt Corral, and say, hey, he might be a little bit raw coming from an RPO style offense, or not a great pocket passer, very raw in that, like from that perspective, if you're Willis, but they have higher upside. So I think teams have different philosophies, and we've seen recently with guys like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen that teams are like, hey, let's roll the dice on the high upside at the quarterback spot, because if he busts, doesn't matter. But if he's, a middle of the pack quarterback, we're not really getting anywhere anyways as a franchise.
And fair or not, I think if Trey Lance had been balling out to this point, then it would open the door for Malik Willis and Matt Corral to be a first-round pick, because you're also taking him in the first round, and you're not giving up 3 first-rounders to get him like you did with Trey Lance. I mean, we don't know what Trey Lance is going to be. He could end up being great, but there's so little on him coming out of North Dakota State that we just didn't, or South Dakota State, that we don't know. And there's a lot of pressure on him, undue pressure, because of the fact they traded up. And, as we all know, they should have taken Mac Jones, but they didn't do it. All right, let's talk about some of these other quarterbacks. Oh, go ahead, Josh. What do you got?
Well, I was going to say, to spin it back there a little bit, we're talking about the weakness of this quarterback group. Does that potentially incite some of these quarterback needy teams, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's Washington? We have seen Carolina jump back into the quarterback market here recently, according to reports.
Debo's Eagles.
Is that Debo's Eagles? I mean, is this going to spur some action in the veteran trade market? We've already got Deshaun Watson being discussed, right or wrong. So Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson.
The off-field stuff. We'll take the off-field stuff off the table for Deshaun Watson because we're not capable. We're not smart enough to talk about that. We're not legal scholars, and right or wrong, it's right. We'll get ourselves in trouble. So let's just assume football-wise, talking about Deshaun Watson. So Josh, who do you want, assuming just football-related stuff, for the next 2 years, and on the table are Deshaun, Aaron Rodgers, Russ Wilson, and let's say you're the Broncos.
Well, for the next 2 years, I would probably still take Aaron Rodgers. As a long-term play, I'm obviously taking Deshaun Watson of that group. But I think that has to be factored into the equation is, as maybe Houston is trying to dump Watson, do you even care if you're getting high first-round picks in return if it's not going to amount to a quarterback? Like, they have to find a team that's going to be able to send a quarterback in return. In my opinion, that's probably why a trade with Miami is potentially the most intriguing to Houston as we approach the deadline.
What do you think, Traps, in terms of who do you want to build your team around of those 3 quarterbacks that I mentioned? Any other quarterbacks you want to throw out there? I'm going to take a quick look and see which quarterback's going to be available.
I don't think there's any more. And I think, Josh's answer of Aaron Rodgers makes sense. I think, though, a case can be made for Russell Wilson. I think he's done more with some pretty mediocre Seahawks rosters over especially the last 3 to 5 seasons. Certainly Aaron Rodgers, outside of Devonta Adams, hasn't had, all pro wide receivers and tight ends on that team. But I think a case could be made that Russell Wilson being a little bit younger than Aaron Rodgers, and the fact that, again, he's elevated those Seahawks teams that otherwise would probably be 4 or 5 win teams into the playoffs, winning games. I know they haven't obviously had a ton of success in the postseason recently, but I think for 2 years, if you can get 31, 32-year-old Russell Wilson, that's still a player that can elevate your team to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And you're right. There's not a lot to choose from after this season. I mean, Fitzpatrick, Andy Dalton, Jameis, so you're at that point. Maybe Marcus Mariota, who I weirdly liked a lot going to the Raiders a few years ago, but he's been injured. So, yeah, I mean, there's some real issues there. So let's talk about the rest of this quarterbacks class, because that's going to be plan B for a lot of these teams. So we mentioned Matt Corral. We mentioned Carson Strong. We talked a little about Kenny Pickett. I have Sam Howell going to the bottom of this first round at 29th to the Lions, which the Lions need a quarterback. Jared Goff is another name we could put out there, even though he's under contract for a few more years. I would not take Sam Howell in the first round. I was talking to Scott about this a few weeks ago. Sam Howell, to me, feels a little bit like Jordan Love, and that Jordan Love in 2018 had all those playmakers around him, had that offensive line, and then everyone left, and he said, I'm going to do everything, and threw 50 interceptions. That said, I still like Jordan Love in 2019. I was not crazy about Sam Howell over the summer, where he had both the running backs and both the wide receivers, all who are, I think Daz Newsome is still on the NFL roster, but all those guys, De'Ami Brown, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, those guys are all playing in the NFL and playing well, and now he's just flat out below average. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I know the offensive line came back, all 5 starters. They've struggled. Sam Howell hasn't been great. He's gotten better, quote unquote. He's better than Spencer Rattler, if that makes you feel any better. I wouldn't take him in round 1, but Josh, I'll start with you. Let's start with, you can talk about Spencer Rattler, Desmond Ridder, and Sam Howell, and maybe anyone else that's sort of, you got your eye on it as possible quarterback targets, either late round 1, if you want to take them there, or probably day 2.
Yeah, what a fun group of quarterbacks to talk about. Yeah, Sam Howell had a slow start to the year. I do think he's gotten better, to the point where he's leveling out a little bit. I do agree that he's probably not going to be a first-round graded player. Now, there is a difference between having a first-round grade and being taken in the first round. I think that Kenny Pickett could end up being taken in the first round. I do not think he is going to carry a first-round grade. We would probably all agree that some quarterback that does not carry a first-round grade from each of us respectively is probably going to be taken in the first round simply because of need. Desmond Ridder, I'm not as fond of as a lot of people. I think decision-making accuracy is just not where it needs to be. So of the 3 that you gave me, Sam Howell is the one that I would be inclined to back, just because I think he can step into a good situation and be that consistent game manager type quarterback that is at least able to have you in contention for a playoff spot. So I don't think any of those three are going to be among the elites down the road, but if you're looking for one to kind of support, it would probably be Howell, in my opinion.
And another thing I should mention, and Traps, I'll let you answer for this. I forgot about him. I actually like the way he played to start the year, but he got hurt. Phil Jerkovich out of BC, so we can throw his name in the mix too. He's not. I don't think he's going to be first round pick. I wouldn't take him in the first round. And even if you want, just for giggles, Keaton Slovis, who needed to have a good year, and he has refused to do that so far.
You also have Tanner Mckee at Stanford.
Tanner Mckee, who replaces Davis Mills, who replaces KJ Costello, who has fallen off the face of the earth.
Yeah, with Phil Jerkovic, I think he's a complete traits guy. I could see him right now carrying like day 3 grades for a lot of teams because he's big, he can run, the arm strength is there, he's a little unpolished. The one thing I'll say about where you have Sam Howell at 29 to the Lions, he kind of feels like, of course, he's having like the opposite season of someone like Matt Corral or Kenny Pickett that's rising upwards, that if the Lions could get Sam Howell at number 29 overall, I feel like that's tremendous value. And the one thing that I like, I mean, I don't love Sam Howell. I wasn't a huge fan coming into this season. I certainly agree with you that, the talent around him really elevated him at such a young age there at North Carolina. But in a weird way, I almost like that Sam Howell has now gone through a season where everything is not conducive to him being amazing. Like, and maybe it's the Buffalo guy in me, but the fact that like Josh Allen at Wyoming had to play some games where he was outmatched and he wasn't throwing to a bunch of NFL players, because in the NFL, I mean, Trevor Lawrence is kind of like, what's going on? Like, we're not just trouncing every single team. We don't have an advantage at every receiver spot and every offensive line spot. I almost like that for Sam Howell, that if you draft him, I don't think you believe he's going to elevate you or completely overhaul your franchise overnight. But if you're picking him at 29 overall and you say, hey, let's give him a good offensive line, maybe good running backs like he had in college to dump it down to, maybe some decent receivers, then he can be good. And that hasn't been great this season at North Carolina, but like you said, he's kind of treading water, hasn't completely had a disastrous season like I think Spencer Rattler's had, where he's probably going to return to Oklahoma. So I almost weirdly like the fact that Sam Howell has to play out this whole season without a bunch of NFL skill position players and as good of an offensive line. So he is almost getting experience of what it's probably going to be like if he's a rookie starter in the NFL.
Yeah, the only thing, I don't disagree with that. And the only pushback I would have is that he's basically 65%, maybe less, of Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford didn't work out so great in Detroit. Now, what has changed is that Dan Campbell is one of my favorite people on planet Earth right now, and Brad Holmes is the GM, and you would imagine that he seems to be trying to do the right things. We'll find out. Time will tell. But so maybe that's – but to your point, if you're going to take him in the bottom round one, you can't win without a quarterback. So you have to, at some point, and Josh sort of hinted at this, you have to take flyers on these guys. So I do understand that. All right, let's get back. We'll talk about the draft, the quarterback specifically, as we go through this process, because they're obviously the most important players. Let's get back to my latest mock draft. And I want to get to number 8 because this is crazy town even for me. Let me double check real quick. Josh, let's see how good you are on Steelers draft history. When was 2010, but what pick was Maurkice Pouncey? Do you remember? I'm going to look up real quick.
Maurkice Pouncey, I want to say he was... See, now I'm afraid I'm getting the Pouncey's wrong. I'm going to say 25.
He was 18. Okay, that's close. 18. So the highest a center's been drafted in the last 20 years is 18th. Maurkice Pouncey was one. Brent's guy, Garrett Bradbury, also went 18th overall. And there may
Rookie
have been...
of the year, Garrett Bradbury.
Rookie of the year, Garrett Bradbury. Ryan Kelly may have gone 18th. I don't hold me on that one. But my point is that I have Tyler Linderbaum going 8th overall at center to the Giants. So there are actually a lot of teams that need centers. The Steelers could actually be in that conversation as well. The Cowboys, you want to put them in the mix. But here's the thing. I've already watched 2 of Tyler Linderbaum's games this year, and he is A+ every time the ball is snapped. He is a grown man. You guys probably know this. But for those who are listening, you may not. He had played along Tristan Wirfs, who now plays right tackle for the Buccaneers, the first-round pick. They traded up to get him. He's been really, really good in year 2. But they played together at Iowa. They were both wrestlers in high school. The first 2 times they wrestled, Tristan beat him. The last time, Tyler beat him in the heavyweight class, not surprisingly. So he has a wrestling background, which seems to be a prerequisite to play at Iowa. And he just takes over games. And we saw it last night in the Seattle game. Kyle Fuller, who might as well have been the cornerback Kyle Fuller playing center for the Seahawks. The Seahawks center is named Kyle Fuller. He had a very tough evening. And if you can't snap the ball and your quarterback is Geno Smith, that creates a lot of problems that probably shouldn't be an issue. And I think Tyler Linderbaum solves a lot of problems. How crazy is it, Traps, that I have a center going in the top 10?
I love watching offensive line play, probably more than anything else when I'm scouting. And Linderbaum has been just absolute nirvana watching him. I think bring up Garrett Bradbury, and that was Brinson's offensive rookie of the year pick, correct?
Right.
Linderbaum is who people wanted Garrett Bradbury to be, and that he's super athletic. But like you said, Ryan, that he's like grown man strength on every single play. And Bradbury didn't have the weight. He didn't have the power. He still doesn't really. Linderbaum, coming from Iowa, he's going to be a great run blocker, but I love how good he is, how balanced and how calm, cool, and collected he is as a pass blocker. So I think going this high as a center, it's like, is that valuable? Well, I think if and it kind of goes back to the Quentin Nelson going inside the top 10 where people in that 2018 draft class, I was there in Arlington with Pete Prisco, like, why are you picking a guard this early? It's a guard. Well, if you get an all-pro at that position, I don't think you're ever going to be in problem as a GM if you draft an all-pro if it's inside the top 10.
What do you think, Josh? Thank you to Debo for the graphic on Offensive Rookie of the Year, Garrett Bradbury, as brought to you by Will Brinson a few years ago. What do you got, Josh?
So I'm also a big Linderbaum fan. I know that's not exactly a revelation anymore. I think that's almost unanimous at this point. Selfishly, I would like to see him in one of those wide zone types of schemes that's going to allow him to be in space and really relegate some defenders, because he's been finishing plays and just completely imposing his will on defenders this year. I love the way that he's able to seal backside blocks and make plays in space. So ideally, I would like to see him in a scheme that's going to use his athleticism a little bit more. But yeah, I think he's a fantastic player. I think, as you look back at the NFL draft, Alex Mack was taken, I believe, in the 20s as well. So the center position has not always been valued at the point where you would maybe consider one at number 8. But Tyler Linderbaum, if you think he's going to have the type of impact that an Alex Mack has had when healthy throughout his career, then like Trapp said, you're never going to go broke taking a profit. I mean, if you get an all-pro caliber player in the top 10, you take that every single day, because there are going to be teams in the top 10 that take a player that never make a Pro Bowl and inevitably bust after a first contract.
Yeah, and unlike Creed Humphrey, who went at did he go in the second or third round to the Chiefs? He's playing really well. But the thing about Creed Humphrey, watching him last year at Oklahoma, the year before that, it was that he often would double team. That was the pass blocking situation with Creed Humphrey. Tyler Linderbaum will take on anyone, anywhere. He's always stout at the point of attack. You never see him giving up ground. He's always driving the defensive lineman into the defensive backfield, and it gets your attention. And I'm not an O-line guy, but I can see when some guy's beating some guy's ass, and that's what Tyler does. It feels like every single snap. So, Josh, I'll read you let's take a look at the next picks 9 through 12 here. Get your thoughts on these guys. So if the Falcons taking Andrew Booth Jr., who I love. I went to watch Syracuse play Clemson a few weeks ago. Booth was hurt, so thanks, Andrew, for not being healthy for that. The Eagles at 10. Debo's Eagles haven't taken Kyer Elam, the cornerback out of Florida. Kenyon Green, the Broncos offensive lineman out of Texas A&M. Some people don't love Kenyon Green. I like his versatility. He can play anywhere on the line. That helps. He's been forced to do that because of injury this year. Played inside last year, can play outside. And I'll stop at Jackson Kirkland out of Washington for the Panthers for the next pick. I was surprised at how much I liked him. I didn't know what to expect when I started watching him over the summer, and I thought he was a pleasant surprise. Any thoughts on the offensive linemen / cornerbacks in those 4 picks?
Well, I'll say just in general, it's no surprise that we're starting a draft show now as the Eagles have 3 first-round picks. I mean, of course, Debo's, over there pitching to EK like, yeah, we got to get a draft show right now. In the same week, we've got Penn State and Ohio State. Like, I'm sure we'll discuss that. All seem very fitting, very convenient. But that's what gets me excited when I do mock drafts, is kind of filling out scenarios for the Eagles. Because if Jalen Hurts does end up being the guy, then you've got a real I know that's a very big question mark for another day. But just filling out the needs that they have on the roster with 3 first-round picks, I mean, you're talking about totally revamping your team. And I think interior offensive line, interior defensive line, cornerback, like those have been big positions for them to fill. So Kaiir Elam is one of those bigger cornerbacks, a little more physical. You plug him next to Darius Slay, who's played really well this year. I think that's a really good tandem to have moving forward, and you really solidify what has been a weakness for Philadelphia for a better part of a decade.
Yeah, Traps, let me ask you. You can answer the question about those 4 guys I mentioned, but let me ask you specifically because Josh brought it up. Here are the Eagles' 3 first-rounders that have them taken. I think Debo's okay with defensive help if he's sold on Jalen Hurts, and he's still drinking the Jalen Hurts Kool-Aid, so we'll see if he dies of that or not. But here's who I have the Eagles taking. Kyle Hamilton, who we talked about, Kaiir Elam, who Josh just mentioned, then Christian Harris, the linebacker at Alabama. You have any concerns with that? That's at 15. Anyone you would take other than that, given the guys who were available?
That's a pretty good list. And when I filled out my first, 7 mock drafts starting this football season, I've mostly gone on the defensive side too. And I am not really drinking the Jalen Hurts Kool-Aid as much as Debo is. I grade all the first and second year quarterbacks here at CBS Sports every Tuesday. And I mean, I think Hurts he's shown that he can play in the league and he can probably be an average starter. But I'm almost thinking that for as much as I understand, like everyone, that, the quarterback position is more valuable than anything, that with these 3 first-round picks and a pretty bad quarterback class that seems like, it's a toss-up more than ever if any of these guys are going to be good, the Eagles should just do what you have them doing, like fixing their defense, adding a linebacker, a corner, maybe another edge rusher with Derek Barnett at the end of his contract and Brandon Graham at his age. And then just giving Jalen Hurts another season with a better roster. And then if you're still one of the worst teams in the NFL, then you pick a quarterback in 2023 that build up your team. So then in the future, it's not you're inserting a young quarterback if you move on from Jalen Hurts to a roster that has, a recent first round pick that didn't really turn out and some holes along the roster. So I'm completely fine. Kyle Hamilton, Kaiir Elam, I think would add so much versatility to kind of a sneaky secondary in terms of, like you said, Darius Slay, Anthony Harris. There are some good pieces there, but it's also a defense that definitely needs an infusion of talent. So I think go defense, do whatever you can, stay away from the quarterbacks if you're the Eagles, and just give Jalen Hurts another season.
And I'll hop in real quick, Ryan. I am drinking, as always, just a little bit of Kool-Aid. I'm on the optimistic side of things. But knowing this stockpile of picks that they have, I would definitely entertain a quarterback or a move up for a quarterback. But everything I'm hearing and what you guys are saying during this show, I just recognize the weakness of this quarterback draft class. So despite 3 picks that could be in the top 10 or maybe 15, a pick from the Dolphins that could very well be in the top 3. I would love to have a surefire pick at a quarterback, but I don't want to just reach for it and settle for someone that the organization doesn't value or doesn't really like. And they're just, we have 3 top 15 picks. We have to come out of this draft with a quarterback. I wish Jalen Hurts was in a better position right now, but by no stretch do I think he is solidified himself as the guy or even close to the guy moving forward where they wouldn't consider something like that.
So, Debo, let me ask you this, because I think previously you said you don't want to give up these 3 first-rounders in 2022 for Deshaun Watson. What about you give a pick 6, pick 15, and a 2023 first-rounder, and you can choose whether it's Deshaun, Russ, or Aaron Rodgers. Would you do that?
Yeah, give me
Why are you hesitating?
Yes, I'm just trying to think of which one out of the 3 that I was going to place.
Oh, okay.
I'll go in the middle, and I'll say Russell Wilson would be my choice out of those 3, just balancing future and a little bit of the off-the-field stuff with Deshaun and Aaron Rodgers still playing at a super high level. I was just deciding between the 3 of those.
Okay.
I think he's worth it, but I like the defensive approach that you have laid out here. Stingley is a huge target for me if he's able to slip a little bit, or if the Eagles, with that Dolphins pick or their own, can get inside the top 5. But I told you a couple of weeks ago, I'm already texting friends about watching some Oregon games and having Kayvon Thibodeaux in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's a fun exercise because there's a lot to love. The only thing is, like, keep your fingers crossed he doesn't roll his ankle again or whatever. But yeah, he's been fun. All right, Traps, let's roll through these next few, and I'll let you fire off your thoughts. So at 13, the Jets take Karlaftis, Josh's guy. The Pats at 14 take the first wide receiver, Garrett Wilson. And I go back and forth with my favorite wide receivers. I'll let you weigh in on where you are in terms of your rankings, and Josh can follow up. Eagles, Christian Harris, we mentioned. 16, and again, this is reverse through roll odds. The Bengals aren't picking 16th. We sit here. Jalen Weidermeyer, and I just love the idea of giving Josh Burrow another weapon. Uzama's in the last year of his deal. Drew Sample hasn't really taken off yet. Maybe he will. But I love Weidermeyer in the middle of this defense. He probably, in that offense, he doesn't go this high, but just for fun. And then I have the Steelers and Carson Strong, who we talked about. Any name jump out at you, and then your thoughts on the wide receiver class in general?
To me, I think you said it right about Jalen Weidermeyer, that he doesn't feel like on film that he's a first-round pick, but that would kind of make sense. I mean, obviously, like you said, the Bengals probably not going to pick 16th, but if they're there in the 20s and they're like, hey, we have like, this is even a need pick over a value pick, I would be fine with Weidermeyer there. I think he's shown his ability as a pass catching tight end over the past couple of seasons in the SEC. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't like George Karlaftis as much as Josh, but I think he's probably going to be like a top 20 pick. And then, talk about that JJ Watt type mold that he, even from his freshman season at Purdue.
Traps, let me ask you about Karlaftis, because he reminds me a little bit of AJ Epinesa, and you're
exactly right. Yeah,
he's a Bills guy. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and that they have similar styles, and that they're power players. The one thing I think, though, that will be different once they get to the NFL, AJ Epinesa goes in the second round. He was 275 at the combine. The Bills said, hey, we want you to slim down into the 260s. And his rookie season wasn't terrible. He didn't really play a ton, but you could tell like he lost a lot of that power. And then now this year he's up weight a little bit and has had a full year in the NFL strength and conditioning program. And he's looked like that same kind of power player that he was at Iowa, where a lot of people thought he was going to be a first-round pick. I think Karlaftis is going to get to the NFL, and no team is going to say, hey, lose 10 or 15 or 20 pounds to be a little bit faster. He's that truly inside-outside guy. The Bills haven't really used AJ Epinesa that much on the inside. I think Karlaftis, you want to move him up and down the line of scrimmage, and he is pretty high ceiling, but he's also extremely high floor. And in terms of the wide receivers, I'm kind of with you, Ryan. I kind of go back and forth. In watching the film, though, I think Garrett Wilson has the most intriguing and more classic first-round wide receiver traits, like just his twitchiness, how sudden he is, getting off the line of scrimmage with his releases, breaking off the top of his route stems, yards after the catch skill. Like, he obviously has to kind of share the ball with Chris Olave. But I think Garrett Wilson, if you had to like make a bet on who is the safest receiver to go in round one, I think Garrett Wilson is the guy. I mean, there's Drake London, who I really like at USC, but he's kind of that big body type that has kind of fallen by the wayside in terms of being popular. Garrett Wilson can get open. He's really good after the catch, and he's got a lot bigger catch radius than being in that 5'10 or 5'11 mold would kind of indicate. So I think Garrett Wilson for the Patriots, we know Bill Belichick has kind of shied away from those first round receivers, or if he's picked them, they've been pretty bad. But given what the Patriots need, I think Garrett Wilson would be a good pick for them.
Josh, how do you rank these wide receivers? Because they're different body types, different skill sets, all obviously having great seasons.
Yeah, I still have Garrett Wilson, so it's a clean sweep. I still have Garrett Wilson as my top receiver. I'm not going to reiterate everything that Traps just said, because it was all true. I mean, Wilson is just one of those guys that has the it factor, real smooth player. I would not be surprised if we're looking back on Chris Olave in a couple of years and saying, he's having a Terry McLaurin type career at this point. Like, it would not surprise me if we were having that kind of conversation. Treylon Burks, we've seen his ability after the catch this season. Those would probably be my top three guys. I did like George Pickens and the potential that he brings to the field, but unfortunately that potential has been off the field this year as he's been dealing with injuries. So a guy that I would like to see get back on the field at some point, see where he is at this point in the year. But those three would probably be pretty safely entrenched as my top three receivers.
Yeah, I had a scout before the season. He was really talking up Drake London. I was like, yeah, he doesn't remind. I don't think he's Michael Pittman. I think he's more. I actually said I think he's more Drew Bennett. So disrespectful to Drake London. No apologies to Drew Bennett for the comparison.
Drew Bennett drop in 2021. That's pretty good. That's
old
awesome.
School. Drake London's really good. USC stinks. Keaton Slovis hasn't been great. His arm strength's an issue, and I thought maybe he could overcome that. He can't. Drake London's been balling out, and he balled out against Notre Dame. He does it each and every week. We'll see what kind of fit he is, because he's not going to outrun you down the field, but maybe he doesn't need to. I don't know if Debo thinks he's better than J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, but presumably he is. Second round pick, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. But this is an interesting class. Another name I'll throw out there is Justin Ross, who also battled injury, a serious neck injury last year, and I have him going at the bottom of the first round. He actually looked pretty good against Syracuse. Again, that offense stinks at Clemson somehow. DJ Uiagalelei has struggled. Dabo Swinney does not trust him and benched him last week and then finally brought him back in. So we'll see what happens there. All right, let's roll through the rest of these picks, see if we can wrap this bad boy up. Darian Kendrick, I have him going 18th to the Vikings. Clemson transfer, plays at Georgia now. Georgia probably will literally have every guy on that defense drafted at some point when they're eligible. After that, I have Ekwonu, he was on Feldman's freak list, the guard out of NC State. We mentioned Olave and Drake London. Charles Cross going to the Titans at 22. That defense is playing well in Tennessee, which is sort of funny. So I have to address the offensive line. We mentioned Traylon Burks. Kingsley Enagbare, you can tell me if I pronounce that wrong, Josh, going to your Browns. Jalen Catalan, the safety, going to the Cowboys. He's done for the year with a shoulder injury. He's a redshirt sophomore. He could choose to come back, but there was some day one, day two buzz about him before he got hurt. And then I'll stop it for now with Isaiah Spiller going to the Cardinals at 27. I don't know if a running back goes in the first round, but I love the idea of Spiller going to the Cardinals offense. It's already really, really awesome. Josh, any thoughts about those names? Anything sticks out to you? Any concerns about the Browns taking an edge rusher?
No, I don't have any issues with the Browns taking an edge rusher. I think Jadeveon Clowney has been really good for them this year, especially in run support. Has offered a little bit more of the pass rushing potential that so many had hoped for earlier in his career. Jalen Catalan is a guy that I've just kind of struggled to get on board with, quite frankly, because he's listed. He's probably a little smaller than what he's even listed. So that's a little bit of a concern for me. He's obviously got the injury. My biggest concern, though, is just his tackling. He's had a lot of issues tackling in space this year, coming downhill, making those plays. So that would be my biggest concern. He's obviously one of the most exciting defensive players in this class because of the splash plays that he makes, his quick twitches, his top end speed, all that kind of stuff. I just kind of have some issues with his ability to translate that into a consistent producer in the NFL.
Josh, I'm sorry, Traps, any comments? And by the way, this safety class isn't that deep. I had Brandon Joseph out of Northwestern going in one of the. I didn't love him as a day one pick, so I'm just sort of throwing stuff against the board here in late October. Any thoughts in general about those names, Traps?
Yeah, Charles Cross is really fascinating because he's a redshirt sophomore, and his film, I think if he stays at school, we could be talking about him as like a top 5 pick next year, or even the following season if he stays for 2 more years. Probably won't stay for 2 more, but in terms of being super smooth in pass protection, and he was he got a ton of awards last year, freshman All-American, stuff like that. But it was obvious that he needed to add weight and power to his game. I think he's done that this season, and that's why putting him in a mock draft as a redshirt sophomore offensive lineman is not crazy, because there is legitimate first or maybe early second round buzz for him. But what he can bring as a pass protector, I've really liked that. And I think in Tennessee, to just continue to add to that offensive line, even if someone like Charles Cross would be more of a pick for 2023, that he's not going to play a ton early on, especially with the saga that happened with Isaiah Wilson a few years ago. I think Charles Cross has really fascinated me on film because of how smooth and effortless it looks on the field for him, and the fact that he's so young and playing at such a high level in the SEC.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. All right, let's get to these last 5 picks here. I have the Ravens taking Trent McDuffie. I love McDuffie. I love the way he plays. Washington continually puts out these defensive backs that are sort of all over the field playmakers and very versatile. Lions, Sam Howell, we talked about that. The Chiefs and Ahmad Gardner. Maybe the Chiefs draft a quarterback. I'm only half kidding. They do need some offensive line help, but the lack of depth of the offensive line towards the end of the first round could be a concern. The Bucs and Jordan Davis, who's getting a lot of love on the mock draft community. I don't know if you take a guy who's feels like a 2-down player in the top 15, but I mean, he's unstoppable. There's no denying that. And then Josh's guy, Darren Kennard, going to Traps' team. I don't know if Kennard's a first round pick, but he is a mauler. He plays very angry. Josh, I'll start with you. Would you take Kennard in the first round, and any comments on the other guys there?
I would certainly consider him in the first round. There's only, a handful of guys that I'm comfortable saying like just comfortably warrant being taken in the first round right now. So Kennard, I don't think it's a slam dunk that he's taken in the first round, but I do think he's warranted that type of consideration. Years previously, Kentucky has been very run heavy, so he's been that mauler that you say there in the explanation. But this year's Kentucky offense has been much more pass happy. It still leans run, but a lot more passes this year, which means he's showing a lot of progress in pass protection each given week. So you just kind of hope to continue seeing that development throughout the course of the year. But a guy that I think is, just if you're talking about needing a yard at the next level, whether it's 3rd and 1, whether it's 4th and 1, I'm running behind Darian Kennard because he's going to clear a path for whoever the ball carrier is.
Traps, any thoughts on those final 5 guys?
Well, seeing as though the Bills just lost the game because they could not convert on a 4th and 1, I would be down for Darian Kennard in Buffalo as long as he's going to play guard at the next level, because the Bills drafted 2 kind of developmental tackles in Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle on day 2 and day 3 last year. They have Darrell Williams. They have Deion Dawkins. They probably wouldn't pick someone to play tackle right away, but they need guard. Like, that's the biggest need on this Bills roster right now. John Feliciano, he's below average. At times he's average, but he's a little smaller. So to bring in someone that would add to that mentality up front, that he's not going to be overpowered, that can deal with the strength of NFL defensive tackles right away, Darian Kennard would make a lot of sense. And Ryan, I agree with you on Jordan Davis, and that, like, do you want to pick a 2-down player, a nose tackle that early? I wouldn't do it, but Derek Brown just went inside the top 10 in the 2020 draft, and I was not, or 2019, whatever that was, I was not a fan of that. He's been pretty good. He's a decent pass rusher. I think Jordan Davis, because of like the fact that he's playing at Georgia in the SEC, they're probably going to be in the college football playoff, probably in the national title game. He's going to get a lot of eyeballs on him, and he'll ultimately go in the first round, even if he's like an elite run defender, but doesn't give you a lot as a pass rusher.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. All right, we'll bounce on this. Josh, I want to get your thoughts on a couple games to watch this weekend. Tell me about, we talked about Aiden Hutchinson already. Michigan's playing Michigan State. Tell me about Daxton Hill, the defensive back for Michigan, and Kenneth Walker in particular for Michigan State. And then I want you to circle back, and I want to hear something about Debo's Jahan Dotson and Rasheed Walker out of Penn State versus Ohio State.
Yeah, so we'll start with Michigan and Michigan State. Obviously, you've got Aiden Hutchinson in that game. Daxton Hill is a guy that has tremendous versatility in the secondary. He can play in the nickel. He can play boundary. He can play safety. Like, this is a guy that was a 5-star talent. Alabama tried to flip him. I think they actually did flip him, and he went back. I don't remember how it played out, but it was a really contested recruitment. Obviously they had Ambry Thomas last year. They had some talent on the boundary, so Daxton just kind of fit in where he was needed. And, through that, he's developed a lot of versatility. Michigan State, Kenneth Walker, a guy that, I thought very highly of when he transferred from Wake Forest before he's even had this breakout season. In my Big Ten preview, I mentioned him as an impact transfer from Wake Forest. So I've not been surprised that he's had success. I would say I've been a little surprised at the amount of success that he's had, but just a really, really well-rounded player, able to catch passes out of the backfield, just a smooth runner, everything that you kind of look for in the position. And then to move over to Penn State and Ohio State, Jahan Dotson has gotten a lot of love this year, and I think it's warranted. We see these undersized type wide receivers, and he's, you're seeing him play in the slot a little bit, and you're thinking, okay, this is one of those undersized slot receivers. He's going to be running slants. He's going to be playing near the line of scrimmage. We're seeing some of those smaller wide receivers testing vertically more than we've seen in previous years. I mean, Rondale Moore is doing it in the NFL. Wan'Dale Robinson is doing it at Kentucky, and Jahan Dotson is doing it at Penn State. He's testing defenses vertically, showing that versatility to where he can play at all 3 levels and do it well. So I think he's definitely warranted the first-round consideration if it's a team that knows how to use a player of his skill set, his size, all of that kind of stuff. And I think Arizona's done a fantastic job with how they've moved Rondale Moore around pre-snap, post-snap, and challenged at all 3 levels with him.
The only person that doesn't like Rondale Moore in Arizona is Andy Isabella, because that's who that he was supposed to be. I agree with you 100%. All right, that's a wrap on the first Pick 6 2022 NFL Mock Draft live show. We'll be back every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Don't forget to subscribe. Bang the like button, as Debo likes to say. Turn on the alerts and keep sending those questions, and we'll answer them. See you guys next week.